It was a bright afternoon, and the city buzzed with life. Streets were packed with hurried footsteps, the occasional honking car, and people chasing after their next appointment or leisure outing. Amid this organized chaos, Daniel, a soft-spoken, well-dressed man, stepped out of his car in front of one of the city's most prestigious luxury boutiques. The store's exterior gleamed with elegance, its pristine glass windows showcasing jewelry and accessories worth more than most people's annual salaries. Today, Daniel wasn't just any passerby. He had a mission. Daniel was an accomplished engineer, a man of quiet confidence who had weathered many storms in life. The reason for his visit to this opulent boutique was deeply personal, a gift for his wife. For years, she had been his rock, supporting him through long nights of work, career challenges, and life's many trials. Her birthday was approaching, and Daniel wanted to give her something truly special, a token of his gratitude and love. This wasn't just about buying jewelry, it was about expressing a bond that had withstood the test of time. The boutique was intimidating at first glance. Its white marble floors glimmered under soft, golden pendant lights, and the faint aroma of expensive perfume lingered in the air. The interior was hushed, almost like a sanctuary, as if speaking too loudly would tarnish the luxury on display. Daniel adjusted his blazer, a sharp navy piece he had chosen carefully for the occasion. His shoes, polished to perfection, echoed softly as he approached the entrance. He took a deep breath, ready to make the moment memorable. As he entered, the bell above the door let out a soft chime, announcing his arrival. His eyes took a moment to adjust to the brightness. Around him, there were a few other customers, a couple leaning over a glass jewelry case and a woman inspecting scarves. Behind the counter stood a woman in her late 40s, the store manager, with perfectly coiffed platinum blonde hair and a suit that radiated authority. She glanced up from her phone, her gaze locking on Daniel for a brief moment before scanning him from head to toe. Her expression shifted subtly, a flicker of something cold and dismissive crossing her face. Daniel noticed but chose to ignore it. He had seen looks like that before, and though they stung, he wasn't here to dwell on negativity. "Good afternoon," he said warmly, his voice steady but polite. "I'm looking for a gift for my wife. Her birthday is coming up." The manager's head tilted slightly, her lips pressing into a tight line. For a moment, she said nothing, as if weighing whether his presence in the store was warranted. When she finally spoke, her tone was clipped. "Do you have an appointment?" Daniel blinked, caught off guard. "An appointment? No, I wasn't aware I needed one," he replied, maintaining his composure. Her eyebrows arched slightly, and her tone shifted, becoming faintly patronizing. "We typically work with clients by appointment. It's more efficient that way." Daniel felt the sting of her words but didn't let it show. "I see. Well, I won't take much of your time. I just wanted to browse for something special." Her hesitation was palpable, but eventually, she gestured vaguely toward the far end of the store. "Fine," she said, her tone cool, "but we're a high-end boutique. Prices might not be what you're used to." The words hit like a slap, but Daniel refused to falter. He nodded slightly, replying calmly, "I'm aware. Thank you." As he began to browse the sparkling jewelry cases, he could feel her eyes on him. Her presence loomed, not as a helpful guide, but as a silent overseer, scrutinizing his every move. The other customers glanced at him briefly, their expressions unreadable, before returning to their own shopping. Daniel tried to focus on the array of delicate gold bracelets, diamond earrings, and elegant necklaces. Each piece seemed to radiate the care and precision that went into its creation. Yet, the weight of the manager's judgment hung in the air, making it hard to concentrate. "Is there something specific you're looking for?" she asked, her voice cutting through his thoughts. Her tone was polite on the surface, but the underlying condescension was unmistakable. "Yes," Daniel replied, turning to face her. "A bracelet, something elegant but not too flashy. My wife prefers a simple style." The manager's smile was thin, barely masking her disdain. "I see," she said, her tone laced with insincerity. "We have some options, but perhaps you prefer to check out our lower-tier collection online. It might be more suitable." Daniel felt his chest tighten, anger and disbelief bubbling beneath his composed exterior. He paused for a moment, choosing his words carefully. "I'd still like to see what you have here," he said firmly. Her expression didn't change, but the tension in her posture spoke volumes. Reluctantly, she pulled out a tray of bracelets, placing it on the counter with deliberate slowness. The motion felt almost mocking, as if she were daring him to prove he belonged. Daniel leaned in, examining the tray's contents. Among them was a slender gold bracelet with a small emerald at its center. Its simplicity and elegance immediately caught his eye. "This one's beautiful," he said, pointing to it. "May I see it up close?" The manager hesitated, her gloved hand hovering over the piece before she picked it up with exaggerated caution. "This piece is quite exclusive," she said, her tone warning. "Very high-end." "That's fine," Daniel replied, unshaken. "May I hold it?" She handed it to him reluctantly, her movements overly cautious, as if she feared he might run off with it. Daniel turned the bracelet over in his hands, admiring its craftsmanship and imagining how it would look on his wife's wrist. But just as he was about to ask more questions, the manager's sharp tone interrupted. "Are you sure this is in your price range?" she asked bluntly. The question hung in the air like an accusation. Daniel's heart sank, but he didn't let the hurt show. Instead, he met her gaze evenly. "I'll let you know once I decide," he said, placing the bracelet back on the counter with deliberate care. Her forced smile thinned further. "You know," she said, leaning in slightly, "we don't usually allow people to browse for too long. It disrupts the flow for our regular clients." The implication was clear. Daniel straightened, his calm demeanor masking the storm brewing within. "I wasn't aware my presence was disruptive," he said, his voice steady. "I'm just here to shop, like anyone else." Her smile vanished. "It's not personal," she said coldly. "It's just policy." Before Daniel could respond, her voice rose slightly. "Actually, I think we're going to have to ask you to leave. I don't think we have anything suitable for you." The words landed like a blow, each syllable dripping with humiliation. Daniel's pulse quickened, but he refused to back down. "I haven't done anything wrong," he said firmly. "I'm just shopping for my wife. Is there a problem?" Her tone grew icy. "Sir, if you don't leave now, I'll have to call security." Daniel stood his ground, his voice calm but resolute. "Call them," he said quietly. "I haven't done anything wrong, and I'm not leaving." The boutique grew tense, the other customers now openly watching the unfolding scene. The manager reached for her phone, describing the situation loudly as she summoned a security guard. Daniel felt a knot of anger and helplessness tighten in his chest. But just as the tension threatened to boil over, a commanding voice cut through the air. "What on earth is going on here?" The room fell silent as all eyes turned toward the entrance. A tall man in a tailored suit stood there, his salt and pepper hair and authoritative presence exuding power. The manager's expression shifted instantly, her arrogance melting into nervousness. "Mr. Coleman," she stammered, "I didn't expect you today." The man's piercing gaze locked onto hers. "Clearly," he said coldly, "would someone explain why this man is being treated like a criminal in my store?" And with those words, everything changed. The air in the boutique was thick with tension as Mr. Coleman stepped further inside. His presence alone seemed to shift the energy of the room, silencing whispers and drawing every eye. He was a man accustomed to authority, and his words carried the weight of someone who wasn't to be questioned. Daniel stood still, his heart pounding in his chest, unsure of how this moment would unfold but quietly relieved that someone had noticed what was happening. The manager, now visibly flustered, tried to regain her composure. "Mr. Coleman," she began, her voice shaky yet laced with the same condescension she had earlier used on Daniel. "I was simply ensuring that the integrity of our store was upheld." This gentleman seemed out of place. Mr. Coleman's piercing gaze didn't waver. His sharp eyes moved from the manager to Daniel, taking in his polished blazer, confident posture, and calm demeanor. Coleman had been in the business of luxury for decades, and he could spot a genuine customer from a mile away. His lips pressed into a thin line, his disappointment in the manager evident. "Out of place?" he repeated, his tone cutting. "And what exactly gave you that impression?" The manager opened her mouth but faltered, clearly searching for a way to defend her actions without making things worse. Well, I mean, he didn't have an appointment, and we prioritize clients who book in advance. It's part of our policy. Daniel, who had been silent until now, finally spoke. His voice was calm, but there was an edge of frustration. I wasn't aware I needed an appointment to shop for my wife's birthday gift. I walked in, just like anyone else, and I've been nothing but respectful since I arrived. The room remained still, the weight of Daniel's words hanging in the air. Mr. Coleman turned his gaze back to the manager. Is this true? Did he act in any way that warranted this treatment? She hesitated, glancing around as though searching for backup, but the other staff members wisely kept their distance. Finally, she muttered, "No, but I was only trying to ensure." Mr. Coleman cut her off with a raised hand. Enough. His voice was firm but not raised, a sign of someone who didn't need volume to assert power. He turned back to Daniel, his expression softening. I sincerely apologize for this behavior. It is not reflective of the values we uphold in this establishment. Daniel nodded, though the sting of humiliation still lingered. Thank you. I appreciate that. But Mr. Coleman wasn't done. Turning to the security guard, who had arrived moments before, he dismissed him with a simple gesture. Then, addressing the room as a whole, he added, I want to make it very clear that every customer who walks through our doors is to be treated with respect, regardless of how they look or whether they've booked an appointment. Am I understood? The staff nodded, their discomfort evident. The tension that had been building slowly began to dissipate, but the situation was far from over. Coleman gestured toward Daniel, inviting him to continue browsing. Let me personally assist you. I'd like to ensure you find exactly what you're looking for. Daniel hesitated for a moment, glancing at the manager, who now stood awkwardly behind the counter, her face flushed with embarrassment. Part of him wanted to leave, to take his business elsewhere and avoid further confrontation. But another part, the part of him that refused to be pushed out of spaces he had every right to occupy, decided to stay. I'd appreciate that, he said finally, his voice steady. Thank you. As the two men moved toward the jewelry cases, the atmosphere shifted. Coleman's tone was warm and professional, a stark contrast to the hostility Daniel had endured moments earlier. Tell me about your wife, Coleman said, gesturing to the display of delicate bracelets and necklaces. What does she like? Simple pieces, bold statements. Daniel smiled slightly, thinking of her. She's not into anything too flashy. She has a classic style, elegant but understated. Coleman nodded, his experienced eye scanning the selection. I think I have just the thing, he said, pulling out a tray of bracelets. This one, he said, holding up a gold bracelet with a small ruby centerpiece, is timeless. It's from a collection that's been very popular among customers looking for something meaningful, but not overpowering. Daniel took the bracelet, turning it over in his hands. It was beautiful, delicate yet striking, the kind of piece his wife would wear every day. He could already picture her reaction when she opened the box. It's perfect, he said, his voice tinged with emotion. Coleman smiled. I thought it might be. Shall we wrap it up for you? As the transaction was completed, Coleman insisted on waiving the service fee. It's the least we can do, he said sincerely. Thank you for giving us the chance to make this right. Daniel nodded, though he couldn't ignore the mix of emotions swirling inside him. Gratitude for Coleman's kindness, anger at the humiliation he'd faced, and a lingering sadness that such incidents were all too common. As he left the store with the elegantly wrapped gift in hand, he felt a sense of vindication, but also a deep awareness of the work still to be done. Meanwhile, back in the boutique, Coleman wasn't ready to let the incident slide. Gathering the staff for an impromptu meeting, his tone was firm but measured. What happened today is unacceptable, he began. This is not the image we want to portray, nor is it the way we treat people. Effective immediately, we will be implementing mandatory customer service training, and store policies will be reviewed to ensure this never happens again. The manager stood silently, her face pale, as Coleman addressed the entire team. We're in the business of luxury, but that doesn't mean we judge who deserves it. Everyone who walks through these doors should feel valued, regardless of their appearance, background, or how much they planned to spend. The staff nodded, their discomfort evident but their agreement clear. Coleman's words carried weight, and the message was one they wouldn't soon forget. As Daniel walked back to his car, the bracelet carefully tucked into its velvet-lined box, he reflected on the events of the day. He knew this wasn't just about a shopping trip gone wrong. It was a moment that highlighted deeper issues about judgment and bias. But for now, he chose to focus on the gift in his hands and the smile it would bring to his wife's face. As Daniel drove home, the afternoon sunlight casting long shadows across the street, his thoughts lingered on the events in the boutique. He gripped the steering wheel tighter, frustration bubbling just beneath the surface. The bracelet, nestled in its box on the passenger seat, was beautiful, a perfect gift for his wife. But the experience of buying it left a bitter taste. Why did something as simple as shopping for a loved one have to become a test of dignity? He replayed the manager's words in his mind, the subtle but undeniable judgment in her tone, and the way her gaze had scanned him, making assumptions before he even spoken. Daniel had encountered bias before, but this was different. It wasn't just about being overlooked. It was about being actively dismissed. The fact that Mr. Coleman had stepped in made all the difference, but it didn't erase the sting of what had happened. At home, his wife Mia greeted him with her usual warmth, her smile lighting up the room. She noticed the tension in his posture immediately. "You okay?" she asked, concern flickering in her eyes as she handed him a glass of water. Daniel hesitated, not wanting to burden her with the story, especially not before her birthday. But Mia knew him too well. "Something happened, didn't it?" she pressed gently, sitting beside him on the couch. He sighed, running a hand through his hair. "It's nothing," he started, then stopped himself. Mia deserved honesty. "I went to the boutique to get your birthday gift. Let's just say it didn't go as smoothly as I'd hoped." Mia frowned, tilting her head. "What do you mean?" Daniel recounted the events of the day, from the manager's condescending remarks to Mr. Coleman's intervention. As he spoke, Mia's expression shifted from disbelief to anger. "She said that to you?" she asked, her voice rising slightly. "And in front of other customers?" He nodded, his jaw tightening. "It's not the first time I've been judged like that, but it still hits hard. The only reason it didn't escalate further was because Mr. Coleman stepped in. He was great, but it shouldn't have taken him to make things right." Mia took a deep breath, her hands clasping his. "I'm sorry you had to go through that, Daniel. It's not fair, and it's not right. But I'm proud of you for standing your ground." Daniel managed a small smile. "I just hope the gift makes up for it," he said, nodding toward the box. Mia glanced at it but didn't open it yet. Instead, her focus remained on Daniel. "You're the best gift I could ever ask for," she said softly, leaning in to kiss his cheek, "but I still want to see what's in the box later." Meanwhile, back at the boutique, the fallout from the incident was far from over. The manager, still flustered from her dressing down by Mr. Coleman, sat in the staff room, replaying the confrontation in her head. She didn't think she'd done anything wrong. In her mind, she had simply been enforcing the store's policies. But the sternness in Mr. Coleman's voice and the way the other staff members had avoided eye contact with her left her feeling uneasy. She didn't want to admit it, but a part of her knew she had crossed a line. It wasn't just about the store policies. It was about the assumptions she had made about Daniel before he even spoken a word. And now, with mandatory training looming and Mr. Coleman keeping a closer eye on operations, she realized that things were going to change, whether she liked it or not. That evening, Mr. Coleman sat in his office, reflecting on the day. He couldn't shake the image of Daniel standing there, calm but clearly affected by the way he had been treated. Coleman prided himself on running an inclusive and welcoming store, but today had been a harsh reminder that not everyone shared his values. He resolved to make sure that incidents like this never happened again. He opened his laptop and began drafting an email to the corporate office, outlining the new measures he planned to implement. Mandatory training was just the start. He wanted stricter oversight on how customers were treated and a more thorough vetting process for hiring staff. As he typed, he thought about how easy it would have been for Daniel to walk out of the store angry and unheard. That thought only strengthened his resolve. The story didn't end there. word of what happened began to spread. One of the other customers in the store that day, a blogger with a significant following, had witnessed the entire incident. She shared her account online, detailing the manager's behavior and praising Mr. Coleman's actions. The post quickly gained traction, sparking a larger conversation about bias in high-end retail spaces. As comments poured in, some shared their own similar experiences, while others debated whether the manager's actions were intentional or simply a misunderstanding. The boutique found itself in the spotlight, with both praise for Mr. Coleman and criticism for the manager's conduct. Daniel stumbled upon the post later that night. At first, he was hesitant to read the comments, unsure if he wanted to relive the experience. But as he scrolled, he realized that his story was resonating with people. It wasn't just about him. It was about a much larger issue. That realization gave him a sense of purpose. Perhaps sharing his experience could lead to real change. Mia encouraged him to add his voice to the conversation. "You have a chance to turn something negative into something meaningful," she said. "People need to hear your side of the story." Daniel nodded, her words giving him clarity. He wasn't sure where this would lead, but he knew one thing. He wasn't going to let the incident define him. Instead, he'd use it as an opportunity to speak out and push for the kind of world where no one had to feel out of place simply for being who they were. As the online post about Daniel's experience continued to circulate, the boutique found itself caught in the storm of public scrutiny. People from all walks of life shared their outrage over the manager's behavior, and the hashtag shopping while black began trending across social media. Daniel's story had struck a chord, sparking debates and conversations that extended far beyond the boutique itself. Daniel sat at his kitchen table late into the night, his phone buzzing with notifications. Mia watched him closely, her eyes full of encouragement but also concern. "Are you sure you're ready for this?" she asked softly. Daniel looked up, a mix of determination and apprehension on his face. "I didn't ask for any of this attention," he said. "But now that it's here, I can't just ignore it. If my story can help shine a light on what so many people go through, then I have to speak up." He decided to write a thoughtful response to the viral post. It wasn't about anger or revenge. It was about fostering understanding and accountability. In his words, he recounted what happened at the boutique, emphasizing the subtle but cutting biases he'd experienced. He also praised Mr. Coleman for stepping in and doing the right thing, making it clear that the issue wasn't with the store as a whole, but with a system of assumptions and behaviors that needed to change. By the time he hit post, it was nearly 2 a.m. The next morning, Daniel's post was everywhere. Media outlets picked up the story, and his inbox was flooded with messages of support. People thanked him for sharing his experience, while others expressed their shock and anger at how he had been treated. A local news station even reached out, asking if he'd be willing to do an interview. At the same time, the boutique faced increasing pressure. The corporate office issued a statement condemning discrimination of any kind and promising to investigate the incident thoroughly. While Mr. Coleman's swift action was praised, the manager in question was suspended pending further review. Inside the boutique, the atmosphere was tense. The staff whispered among themselves, worried about what might happen next. The manager, now at home on leave, felt the walls closing in. Her phone buzzed constantly with calls from coworkers and friends, many of whom were less than sympathetic. She had never imagined that a single customer interaction could spiral into such a public spectacle. For the first time, she began to question her own actions, wondering if she had let her biases cloud her judgment. Meanwhile, Mr. Coleman worked tirelessly to address the fallout. He organized a meeting with the staff to discuss the importance of treating every customer with respect, regardless of appearances or preconceived notions. He also reached out to Daniel directly, hoping to mend the relationship and show him that the boutique was committed to doing better. When Daniel received the call from Mr. Coleman, he was surprised but impressed by the sincerity in the man's voice. "I can't change what happened," Mr. Coleman said, "but I want to make sure it never happens again. We'd like to invite you back to the store, not as a customer, but as a consultant. Help us understand where we went wrong and how we can do better." Daniel hesitated. The idea of walking back into the boutique, even in a different capacity, made his stomach tighten. But he also recognized the opportunity to create real change. After a long pause, he replied, "I'll think about it." As Daniel considered Mr. Coleman's offer, the tension around him grew. News crews began showing up in his neighborhood, eager to get an exclusive interview. His social media accounts were flooded not just with support, but also with criticism from those who accused him of seeking attention. Mia became increasingly protective, shielding their young son from the chaos while trying to keep Daniel grounded. The tipping point came when Daniel received a handwritten letter in the mail. It was from a woman who had been in the boutique that day, one of the customers who had witnessed the confrontation. She apologized for not speaking up in the moment, admitting that she had felt powerless and unsure of how to intervene. Her words resonated deeply with Daniel, reminding him that the issue wasn't just about him. It was about the countless others who experienced the same treatment but didn't have the chance to fight back. With the letter in hand, Daniel made his decision. He called Mr. Coleman and agreed to visit the store, but on one condition. The changes they discussed wouldn't just be surface-level fixes. They had to commit to meaningful, long-term improvements. When the day arrived, Daniel walked into the boutique with a mixture of apprehension and resolve. The same gleaming marble floors and elegant displays greeted him, but the energy in the air felt different. Mr. Coleman greeted him warmly, his demeanor a blend of professionalism and gratitude. Together, they sat down with the staff to begin a conversation that promised to be both uncomfortable and necessary. As Daniel shared his perspective, the staff listened intently, some nodding in agreement while others fidgeted nervously. The manager, watching from afar, felt a pang of regret as Daniel described how her actions had made him feel. She realized that this moment wasn't just about him. It was about her own growth and the need to confront the biases she had long ignored. The conversation was raw, honest, and emotional. By the end, Daniel felt a sense of closure he hadn't expected. But the story was far from over. The real work had just begun, and the question lingered. Would the boutique follow through on its promises, or would it fall back into old patterns? The answer remained uncertain, leaving everyone on edge as they braced for what was to come. As Daniel left the boutique that day, there was a cautious sense of progress. The staff had promised to implement new policies, and Mr. Coleman seemed genuinely committed to change. But just as Daniel began to feel a glimmer of hope, a new development threatened to upend everything. A few days later, Daniel received an email with no subject line. The sender was anonymous, but the message inside was anything but vague. It contained an attachment, a video clip, along with a brief message. Asterisk thought you might want to see this. Asterisk curious but wary, Daniel opened the file, and what he saw sent a chill down his spine. It was security footage from the boutique, capturing the moments leading up to his confrontation with the manager. But there was more. The footage had been edited, showing only select moments that painted Daniel as aggressive and confrontational. It completely omitted the manager's dismissive behavior and outright insults. The email's tone became clear. Someone was trying to rewrite the narrative. Attached was another note. Asterisk keep quiet, or this goes public. Asterisk. Daniel's heart pounded as he reread the message. Was this a threat? Who would want to manipulate the story like this, and why? The boutique's management had seemed sincere, but now he couldn't help but question their motives. Was it possible that someone within the organization wanted to discredit him to protect the store's reputation? Or was this the act of a rogue individual trying to silence him? Determined not to be intimidated, Daniel forwarded the email to Mr. Coleman, along with a blunt question. Asterisk, what is this about? Asterisk, hours passed without a response. Daniel's mind raced, torn between anger and confusion. He couldn't shake the feeling that this was more than just a coincidence. Whoever had sent the email clearly had access to the store's security system, which meant the culprit could be someone on the inside. Later that evening, Mr. Coleman finally called. His voice was heavy with concern. Daniel, I just saw the email you sent. I don't know who would do this, but I promise you it didn't come from me or anyone I authorized. His words were sincere, but they offered little comfort. Daniel could sense that Coleman was as blindsided as he was. This isn't just about me. Daniel said, his voice firm. This is about the bigger issue. If someone is trying to cover this up, it means they're afraid of the truth coming out. I won't let that happen. Mr. Coleman agreed to investigate the source of the footage, promising to keep Daniel updated. But even as they ended the call, Daniel couldn't shake the feeling that there was more to this than anyone realized. The stakes had been raised, and the fight for accountability had become even more personal. As days passed, the boutique remained under intense scrutiny from the public. However, whispers of the edited footage began to surface online. A mysterious account posted the manipulated video, framing Daniel as a disruptive customer. The post quickly gained traction, with some viewers accepting the narrative at face value. Others, however, questioned its authenticity, pointing out inconsistencies and defending Daniel based on his own detailed account of the incident. Daniel knew he couldn't stay silent any longer. With Mia's support, he reached out to a journalist who had been following his story from the beginning. Together, they decided to publicly address the existence of the doctored video. In a heartfelt statement, Daniel explained how the footage had been altered and reiterated his commitment to transparency. He urged viewers to consider the broader issue of systemic biases rather than focusing solely on his personal experience. The journalist article went viral, sparking renewed interest in Daniel's story. Meanwhile, Mr. Coleman's investigation into the source of the footage uncovered an unsettling truth. It turned out that the video had been leaked by a disgruntled former employee, someone who had recently been let go for unrelated misconduct. But even as the culprit was identified, questions lingered about how they had gained access to the security footage and why they had chosen to target Daniel specifically. The revelation brought some clarity, but it also escalated tensions. The boutique's reputation was now in freefall, and Daniel found himself thrust into an even larger spotlight. Media outlets clamored for interviews, activists rallied behind him, and critics continued to scrutinize his every move. Through it all, Daniel remained resolute, driven by a determination to turn this painful experience into a catalyst for change. Yet, just when it seemed like the worst was behind him, another unexpected twist emerged. One evening, Daniel received a call from a private investigator hired by Mr. Coleman. "Mr. Reed," the investigator began, "there's something you need to know. While looking into the video leak, I uncovered some information that may explain why you were targeted in the first place." The investigator's tone was measured, but Daniel could sense the gravity of what was about to be revealed. What came next was a bombshell that no one could have anticipated, leaving Daniel stunned and questioning everything he thought he knew. As the pieces of the puzzle began to come together, the true scope of the conflict became clear, and the stakes were higher than anyone had imagined. The private investigator's revelation left Daniel speechless. The employee who had leaked the edited footage was not acting alone. Digging deeper, the investigator had uncovered a series of internal emails, suggesting that a small group within the boutique's management had been involved in orchestrating the smear campaign. Their motive? To protect the boutique's high-end image and shield the manager from accountability by shifting blame onto Daniel. It was a shocking discovery, one that sent ripples through Daniel's mind. These individuals had actively worked to undermine him, fearing that his story would tarnish the boutique's exclusive reputation. The manager's behavior wasn't an isolated incident. It was part of a broader culture that had gone unchecked for too long. Daniel shared the findings with Mr. Coleman, who was livid. "This is beyond unacceptable," Coleman said, his voice trembling with anger. "Not only did they fail to uphold our values, but they also betrayed the very trust we're trying to rebuild." Coleman assured Daniel that swift action would be taken, but the damage had already been done. For Daniel, this wasn't just about accountability anymore. It was about exposing a system that enabled such behavior in the first place. The next few days were a whirlwind. Coleman held a press conference, announcing the immediate termination of the employees involved in the conspiracy. He also pledged to overhaul the boutique's training and policies, emphasizing transparency and respect for all customers. The move garnered mixed reactions. While some applauded the decisive action, others remained skeptical, viewing it as an attempt to save face. Meanwhile, Daniel was approached by a major news outlet for an exclusive interview. Sitting in front of the camera, he recounted the entire experience, from the initial humiliation to the discovery of the conspiracy. His words were raw and powerful, resonating with viewers who had experienced similar injustices. "This isn't just my story," Daniel said, his voice steady. "It's about how we treat people and the biases we need to confront, no matter how uncomfortable it may be." The interview sparked a wave of support, but it also brought a surprising twist. A former employee of the boutique came forward anonymously, revealing that the manager in question had a history of discriminatory behavior that had been ignored for years. This revelation added a new layer to the story, exposing systemic issues that extended far beyond Daniel's encounter. As the story gained traction, Daniel found himself at the center of a growing movement advocating for inclusivity and accountability in the luxury retail industry. He began collaborating with organizations dedicated to addressing discrimination, using his platform to amplify their work. But just as things seemed to be moving toward resolution, Daniel received a letter in the mail, a handwritten note with no return address. It read, "You're braver than you know. Keep going." Tucked inside was a photograph of a young boy standing outside a boutique, gazing longingly at the window display. On the back of the photo, a single word was written, perspective. The note puzzled Daniel, but it also stirred something within him. It reminded him why he had chosen to stand up in the first place. This wasn't just about clearing his name or holding people accountable. It was about changing perspectives, challenging assumptions, and creating a world where everyone, regardless of appearance or background, felt they belonged. In the end, the boutique underwent significant changes, and Daniel's story became a symbol of resilience and the power of standing up against injustice. But as Daniel looked at the photograph one last time, he realized that the fight was far from over. The journey to true equality would take time, but he was ready to keep going, knowing that even the smallest steps could lead to something extraordinary.